These elegant 1905 photos seems innocent, but look closely at the mirror behind them. The photograph arrived on a Tuesday morning in a worn manila envelope with no return address. Emma Wilson set down her coffee and carefully took the image from its protective sleeve. Her trained eyes were immediately drawn to its remarkable preservation. The photograph showed 5 people arranged on the front steps of a white column mansion. There was a stern-looking man in a dark suit, a woman in an elaborate white dress with a high collar, and 3 children positioned between them like carefully placed ornaments. The clarity was exceptional for 1905. Every detail stood out with startling precision. The intricate lace on the woman's sleeves, the polished shoes, the perfectly manicured lawn stretching behind them. Someone had paid considerable money for this portrait, hiring one of the best photographers available in what appeared to be somewhere in Georgia or Alabama, based on the architectural style. Emma adjusted her desk lamp and reached for her magnifying glass. This was her specialty, restoring and digitizing century-old photographs for historical societies and private collectors. She had handled thousands of images from this era. Each one was a window into lives long finished, stories mostly forgotten. She began her standard documentation process, noting the cardboard backing, the photographer's embossed mark barely visible in the corner, and the sepia tones that had somehow resisted the usual fading. As she scanned the image at high resolution, preparing to begin the restoration work, something caught her attention in the background. Behind the family, visible through the open front door, hung an ornate mirror in the entrance hall. The gilded frame reflected light from a window somewhere to the left. Emma increased the magnification on her screen, squinting at the reflected image. Her breath stopped. In the mirror's reflection, barely visible but unmistakable once noticed, were figures that shouldn't be there. Dark shapes moving behind where the photographer must have stood. She enhanced the contrast, adjusted the brightness, and leaned closer to her monitor. People, several people, and something that looked distinctly like chains connecting them. Emma's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her phone. This couldn't be what it appeared to be. Slavery had ended 40 years before this photograph was taken, but the evidence was there, captured accidentally in a mirror's reflection, preserved in silver and light for over a century. Emma spent the next 3 hours meticulously examining every pixel of the digitized image. The more she enhanced the mirror's reflection, the more certain she became. There were at least 4 figures visible in the reflection, moving in what appeared to be a line. The connecting elements between them were too straight, too deliberate to be anything but restraints. She zoomed back out to examine the photographer's mark in the corner, Whitmore & Sons Fine Photography, Valdosta, Georgia. The embossed lettering was faint but legible. Emma opened her laptop and began searching historical records. Valdosta, a cotton town in southern Georgia, was prosperous during the early 1900s, built on the wealth of agriculture and the railroad. The city's historical society had a website, though it was clearly outdated and difficult to navigate. She found a section on local businesses from the era. Whitmore & Sons had operated from 1898 to 1923. According to a scan directory, they advertised portraiture for distinguished families and commercial photography for modern enterprises. The business had been considered one of the finest photography studios in the region, serving wealthy plantation owners and merchants. Emma sat back in her chair, staring at the photograph displayed across her 2 monitors. One screen showed the full image, the picture of prosperity and respectability that the family had paid to project. The other screen showed the enhanced mirror reflection, the truth they hadn't meant to capture. Her phone buzzed. A text from her friend Marcus, a history professor at Emory University who specialized in post-Reconstruction Southern history. They had collaborated on several projects, and she trusted his expertise completely. "Can you talk? Found something disturbing in a restoration project?" Marcus called within 2 minutes. Emma explained what she had found, sending him the enhanced images as they spoke. The silence on the other end of the line stretched longer than comfortable. "Emma," Marcus finally said, his voice tight, "do you know what you might have here? Evidence of something illegal. Evidence of something that was supposed to have been buried and forgotten. Send me everything you have. The full resolution files, the envelope it came in, any documentation. And Emma, be very careful about who else you show this to. There are families in Georgia who have spent generations building reputations on carefully curated histories." Marcus arrived at Emma's studio the next morning, carrying 2 bunker's boxes filled with photocopied documents and a laptop covered in university stickers. He looked like he hadn't slept. His usually neat appearance was disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed but intense. "I spent all night in the digital archives," he said, setting the boxes on her work table with a heavy thud. What you found isn't just disturbing, it's documentation of a system that most people think ended in 1865. Emma poured them both coffee as Marcus spread out documents across her workspace. Newspaper clippings, court records, labor contracts, and ledgers, all dating from the late 1800s and early 1900s. After the 13th Amendment abolished slavery, Southern states immediately began passing what they call black codes, Marcus explained, pointing to a yellow newspaper article. These laws made it illegal for black people to be unemployed, to loiter, to break labor contracts. The penalties were fines they couldn't pay, which meant jail time, which meant forced labor. He pulled out another document, a labor contract from 1903. This is from a turpentine camp in Georgia. See these terms? The worker is bound to the employer, can't leave, receives no wages beyond room and board. It's slavery with different paperwork. Emma studied the contract, her stomach tightening. And this was legal? Technically, no. Practically, yes. Local sheriffs, judges, and plantation owners worked together. They'd arrest black men on fabricated charges, sentence them to labor camps, and lease them out to private companies. It was called convict leasing, but it was forced labor, and it was incredibly profitable. Marcus opened his laptop and pulled up a series of photographs he had found in university archives. They showed work camps, chain gangs, men working in fields under armed supervision, all dated after 1900. These systems persisted well into the 1940s in some places, he continued, but there's very little photographic evidence because it was all technically illegal. People didn't document it, or if they did, those records were destroyed. Emma turned back to the photograph on her screen. So this family was probably involved in one of these systems that mentioned that wealth, it came from somewhere, and that mirror accidentally captured what they preferred to keep invisible. Finding the family's identity proved easier than Emma expected. The mansion's distinctive architecture, a Greek revival style with 6 prominent columns and symmetrical wings, was unusual enough to be traceable. Marcus knew an architectural historian who specialized in antebellum and post-war Southern estates. Within 2 days, they had an answer. The Harrison Estate, built in 1857, located 15 miles outside Valdosta. The property had remained in the Harrison family until 1952, when it was sold to a lumber company and eventually demolished. Emma found the family in census records. In 1905, the household was listed as Robert Harrison, age 42, occupation landowner, Catherine Harrison, age 38, and their children Thomas, Elizabeth, and Margaret, ages 14, 11, and 8. The property was listed as 4,800 acres primarily devoted to cotton and timber. 23 people were listed as residing on the property beyond the immediate family, all identified as laborers with no surnames recorded, a common practice designed to obscure their identities and legal status. Marcus pulled up property tax records and cross-referenced them with court documents from Lowndes County. A pattern emerged that made Emma's hands go cold. Between 1895 and 1920, Robert Harrison had filed over 60 labor contract enforcement actions in county court. These were civil suits against workers who had allegedly broken their contracts by attempting to leave his property. The punishment was always the same: additional years added to their labor contracts enforced by the county sheriff. This wasn't a plantation in the traditional sense, Marcus explained, his finger tracing through the legal documents. This was a forced labor camp operating under the cover of legal employment contracts. Harrison would pay the fines for men arrested on vagrancy charges, then claim they owed him labor to repay the debt. But the debt never decreased. They added charges for food, housing, tools. The workers could never leave. Emma found a newspaper article from the Valdosta Daily Times dated July 1903. It praised Robert Harrison as a progressive employer providing opportunities for the Negro population and noted his modern approach to agricultural labor management. The contrast between the public image and the documented reality was staggering. "We need to find out who those people in the mirror were," Emma said quietly. "They deserve to have their names known." The search for individual identities proved far more difficult. The Harrison labor records that survived were deliberately vague. First names only, ages approximate, places of origin listed simply as Georgia or Alabama. It was a system designed to make people disappear into paperwork. Marcus spent a week traveling between the Georgia State Archives in Morrow and the County Records Office in Valdosta. What he found painted a progressively darker picture. He returned to Emma's studio with copies of arrest records, court proceedings, and something he had found purely by chance: A ledger book from a rural store that had extended credit to Harrison's workers. "Look at this," he said, spreading the ledger pages across Emma's desk. The store owner kept detailed records because he was trying to get paid. He listed full names, ages, families. He tracked who bought what and when. It was the most complete record Marcus had found of who was actually on that property. The ledger covered 1903 to 1907. Names jumped out from the faded ink. Samuel, age 34, wife Mary, 3 children. Joseph, age 19, brother to Samuel. Daniel, age 41, noted as arrived from Thomasville Camp, January 1904. Ruth, age 28, with infant. Emma compared the dates. The photograph was taken in spring 1905, based on the flowering bushes visible in the background. These people would have been on the property at that exact time. She enhanced the mirror reflection again, measuring the figures' relative heights and positions. 4 people visible moving in a line based on their silhouettes and the way they moved. Emma estimated 3 men and possibly 1 woman or younger person. Marcus found arrest records that corresponded to the names in the ledger. Samuel had been arrested in Valdosta in February 1903 for vagrancy, which the court record indicated meant he was found in town without proof of employment. The fine was $25, an impossible sum. Robert Harrison had paid the fine and Samuel was transferred to his property under a labor contract. "There's no record of him ever leaving," Marcus said quietly. "His name appears in the ledger through 1907, then nothing. No death certificate, no release document, nothing. He just vanishes from the official record." Emma stared at the photograph. Somewhere in that mirror's reflection might be Samuel, a man whose entire existence had been reduced to a few lines in a store ledger and a shadow in a photograph taken without his consent or knowledge. Finding living descendants seemed nearly impossible until Marcus connected with a genealogist in Atlanta who specialized in tracing African American family histories through the fragmentary records of the post-Reconstruction South. Her name was Patricia, and she had spent 30 years piecing together families torn apart by forced migration, illegal labor systems, and deliberate erasure from official records. "The Harrison property," Patricia said when Marcus described their research. "I have had 3 different families ask me about relatives who disappeared into that place. Give me the names from your ledger." A week later, Patricia called with news. She had found a descendant of Samuel. His great-granddaughter, a woman named Diane, living in Jacksonville, Florida. Samuel's wife Mary had escaped the Harrison property in 1908 with their children after Samuel died there. Mary had never spoken much about those years, but she had preserved a few documents and passed down stories to her children. Emma and Marcus drove to Jacksonville on a Saturday morning. Diane met them at a small cafe near her home. Her expression was cautious but curious. She was a retired school teacher in her early 60s with Samuel's name carefully documented in her family Bible. "My great-grandmother Mary was the strongest person I never met," Diane said. "She died before I was born, but my grandmother told me stories. Mary said my great-grandfather was arrested for nothing, just walking through town looking for work after their farm failed. A white man paid his fine, told him he'd work it off in 6 months. 5 years later, he was still there." Diane pulled out a worn envelope from her purse. Inside was a single photograph, creased and faded. It showed a young black man in worn work clothes, his expression serious, standing in front of a wooden structure. "This is Samuel, taken before he was arrested. My grandmother said it was the only picture they had of him. He was 29 when this was taken. He died at 34 on that property. They said it was a work accident, but the family never got details, never saw a body. My great-grandmother always believed he was worked to death." Emma showed Diane the enhanced image from the mirror. "I can't be certain, but based on the timing and the physical descriptions, your great-grandfather might be one of the people reflected here." Diane stared at the image for a long time, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. "He's been invisible all this time, even in the photograph meant to show the family's pride. He's just a shadow in a mirror, but he was there. He existed. His life mattered." Armed with Diane's family testimony and the growing documentary evidence, Marcus contacted colleagues across the South who specialized in this period. What emerged was a comprehensive picture of a system that had operated in plain sight while remaining largely invisible to historical memory. Emma created a detailed timeline on her studio wall. On one side, she pinned the elegant family portrait, the image of prosperity and respectability. On the other side, She pinned everything they had uncovered: arrest records, labor contracts, court filings, ledger entries, and the stories passed down through families like Diane's. Dr. Raymond, a historian from Auburn University who studied convict leasing systems, video called into one of their research sessions. He had spent 20 years documenting these labor camps, and Emma's photograph represented something he had never seen before. Most visual evidence was deliberately destroyed, Dr. Raymond explained. Landowners knew this was legally questionable at best. They didn't want documentation. The few photographs that exist were taken by reformers trying to expose the conditions, not by the people operating the camps. He pulled up examples on his screen, images from around 1910 showing men in chains working under guard. These were taken by journalists who had to sneak onto properties. But your photograph is different. This was taken by the perpetrators themselves for their own vanity, and they accidentally documented their crime. The mirror reflection showed a routine moment, workers being moved from one location to another, restrained to prevent escape. It was so ordinary to the family that they didn't even think to check the mirror's reflection before allowing the photographer to take the shot. Marcus found records of similar labor systems operating on at least 15 other properties within 50 miles of Valdosta. The Harrison estate was not an anomaly. It was part of a regional economy built on forced labor that persisted decades after slavery's legal end. This is why the history matters, Dr. Raymond said. People think slavery ended cleanly in 1865. They don't understand that the systems evolved, found legal loopholes, and continued under different names. Your photograph proves what academic historians have been documenting for years, but in a way that's immediate and undeniable. Emma looked at the elegant family portrait with new eyes. Every detail that had initially impressed her, the fine clothes, the grand house, the carefully composed image, now spoke to wealth built on suffering that the family had worked hard to make invisible. The decision to go public with the photograph was not made lightly. Emma and Marcus spent weeks discussing the implications with historians, legal experts, and descendants like Diane. The photograph was explosive evidence of historical crimes, but it would also thrust unwilling people into a painful spotlight. The Harrison family still exists, Marcus reminded her. Robert's great-grandchildren are living in Georgia and Florida. This will destroy the family mythology they've built. But the truth matters more, Diane said when they consulted her. My great-grandfather's suffering matters more than their comfort. Other families deserve to know what happened to their ancestors. They decided to publish their findings through a peer-reviewed historical journal first, establishing the academic credibility of the research. Then they would work with a documentary filmmaker to tell the broader story. The journal article appeared in the Journal of Southern History 3 months later. The response was immediate and intense. Within 24 hours, the photograph had been shared across social media thousands of times. News outlets picked up the story. Emma's email inbox filled with messages from historians, journalists, and descendants of other people who had disappeared into similar labor systems. But there was also backlash. Emma received angry emails accusing her of attacking Southern heritage and distorting history. Someone created a website claiming the photograph had been manipulated. A lawyer representing the Harrison family sent a letter demanding she cease using their name and threatening legal action for defamation. Marcus fielded calls from reporters carefully. This isn't about condemning descendants for their ancestors' actions, he explained in interview after interview. This is about acknowledging a historical truth that has been deliberately obscured. These forced labor systems existed. They destroyed lives, and we have a responsibility to remember the people who suffered. Patricia, the genealogist, was contacted by 17 different families who believed their relatives may have been held at the Harrison estate. She began the painstaking work of cross-referencing names, dates, and fragmentary records. The documentary filmmaker, a woman named Jordan, who had previously covered civil rights history, visited Emma's studio to examine the original photograph. This is a Rosetta Stone, she said, studying the image. It connects the abstract historical record to actual human beings. It makes the invisible visible. Emma found herself at the center of a controversy she hadn't anticipated, defending not just her research, but the right to tell difficult truth about the past. 6 months after the article's publication, Diane proposed creating a memorial on the site where the Harrison estate once stood. The property was now part of a state forest. The mansion, long demolished, but the land remained. Emma and Marcus helped organize the project. Patricia had identified 23 names of people confirmed to have been held there under forced labor contracts, though they knew there were likely many more whose names had been completely erased. The memorial would be simple: a stone marker listing the known names, with space acknowledging the unnamed many who had also suffered there. The dedication ceremony was planned for a Saturday in October, when the Georgia heat would have eased, but before the rains came. The weeks leading up to the dedication brought both opposition and support. The County Historical Society officially endorsed the memorial. Local churches offered to help with the ceremony, but property rights advocates protested, arguing that marking the site would damage land values and unfairly stigmatize the area. The Harrison family remained largely silent, though one member, Robert Harrison's great-great-grandson, a lawyer named William, reached out privately to Marcus. The conversation was difficult but ultimately productive. "I can't defend what my ancestor did," William said. "The evidence is clear. My family has benefited from wealth built on suffering. I don't know how to reconcile that, but I know that pretending it didn't happen is wrong." William attended the dedication ceremony standing at the back of the crowd. Over 200 people gathered at the memorial site. Descendants of the workers, historians, local residents, and journalists covering the event. Diane spoke first, her voice steady despite the emotion. "My great-grandfather Samuel died here. For over a century his death was invisible, his suffering unacknowledged. Today we say his name. We remember him. We honor all the people who were stolen from their families and forced to labor here." One by one, Patricia read the 23 names they had confirmed. After each name, someone in the crowd would call out, "We remember." The sound echoed through the pine trees that now grew where cotton fields once stood. Emma stood beside the memorial stone, looking at the photograph she had enlarged and mounted on a display board. The elegant family portrait on one side, the enhanced mirror reflection on the other, both truths existing simultaneously. The photograph became part of several museum collections, including the National Museum of African American History and Culture. Emma donated the original to the Smithsonian, but she kept a copy in her studio, a reminder of how history hides in plain sight. The documentary premiered at film festivals and eventually aired on a major streaming platform. It traced not just the story of the Harrison estate, but the broader systems of forced labor that persisted across the South well into the 20th century. Emma's photograph served as the visual centerpiece, the undeniable proof that these systems existed. Patricia continued her genealogy work, and over the next year she identified descendants of 14 more people who had been held at the Harrison estate. Each family received copies of the documents, the store ledger entries, and the photograph. For many, it was the first concrete information they had ever found about ancestors who had simply disappeared from the historical record. Marcos published a book expanding on their research, documenting forced labor systems across Georgia and Alabama. The photograph appeared on the cover with the mirror reflection enhanced and highlighted. Reviews called it essential reading and a corrective to sanitized narratives of the post-Civil War South. Emma returned to her regular work, restoring old photographs, but she approached each image differently. Now she looked more carefully at backgrounds, at reflections, at the details that photographers and subjects might not have noticed. History, she had learned, often revealed itself in moments of inattention. Diane visited her several times and they became friends. On the first anniversary of the memorial dedication, they drove back to the site together. Fresh flowers had been left at the stone marker and someone had added a small American flag. "Do you ever think about how that photograph almost didn't survive?" Diane asked. "It could have been thrown away, lost, destroyed. Samuel could have remained invisible forever." Emma thought about the anonymous envelope, the photograph arriving on a random Tuesday morning. Someone wanted this story told. Someone kept it for over a century, waiting for the right moment. They never discovered who sent the photograph or why. Emma suspected it might have been a descendant of the Harrison family, someone who found it while cleaning out an attic, someone who understood that some truths needed to be told, even when they were painful. The photograph remained a testament to both the crime it inadvertently documented and the persistence of truth. In that mirror's reflection, captured accidentally in 1905, were lives that mattered, suffering that deserved acknowledgement, and history that refused to stay buried. Emma touched the memorial stone, reading the names carved into granite: Samuel, Joseph, Daniel, Ruth, 23 names rescued from erasure and countless others still waiting to be remembered. The elegant photograph had seemed innocent once. Now it served as evidence, memorial, and warning. A reminder that the past is never as simple as it appears, and that every image contains more truth than its subjects intended to reveal.